Hi, everybody. I'm Tom LeBlanc. I'm the editor of Commercial Integrator. Today, I'm lucky to be joined by Jeff Murray, VP of Sales at Zigen. Hi, Jeff.
Hey, how's it going, Tom?
Good. Are you ready to answer 3 questions for the Commercial Integrator audience?
Absolutely.
So, I get a lot of questions about 4K video distribution. To what degree do you find that there's still confusion in the commercial integration market when it comes to transmitting 4K content?
I think the main confusion is there's so many flavors of 4K, and I think it's being perpetrated by advertising and marketing. All 4K is not the same. There's differences in bandwidth. There's differences in compression. There's differences with regard to screen size and requirements. And then there's also content protection that has to come into play depending on what's going to be transmitted through that system. The big thing on bandwidth is 4K UHD could be 2160p 30 444, which is the common flavor out there that will end up fitting through an HD-based T-pipe that limits out at about 10.2 gigabit per second. But the HDMI 2.0 spec goes all the way up to 18 gigabit per second. And that signal is actually 2160p 60 at 444. So right now we're in kind of that gray area of new products coming out. Television manufacturers and display manufacturers are touting and talking about their ability to do the full 60 frame per second 444 no chroma subsampling. So that's where the confusion comes in, and it's up to this point pretty much every product on the market has been using the HDMI 1.4a chipset that can get you to 4K, but again, it limits out at if it's at 60 frames per second, it's at 420. What chroma subsampling is basically color compression, and then 8-bit. So that's where a lot of the confusion is on bandwidth. So I guess the key thing is if you are going to extend the run, which is normally what we do in custom, you're probably going to still be in that 300 megahertz range. The other thing is, do you need 4K? A lot of commercial installs are smaller displays, 50-inch, 55-inch. Really doesn't require 4K, especially depending on the viewing distance of the audience. And then, of course, content protection comes into play. A lot of commercial doesn't have the requirement for movies. A lot of it maybe is teleconferencing and things that don't require the HDCP 2.2. So those are the 4 main things: bandwidth, compression, screen size, and content protection.
Well, one of the reasons that these confusing issues are important is that a lot of commercial integration clients nowadays are using content differently than they have in the past. They're wanting to create content for their internal use, and they're turning to integrators for solutions when it comes to helping them to distribute content. So you're seeing a lot of integration firms very focused on solving their clients' content distribution challenges. And what I'm wondering is, are these guys always equipped enough to solve these problems? So my question to you is, are there any common mistakes that you think that integrators are kind of prone to make if they're not educated enough so that they can avoid potential system hiccups?
I think, again, the main thing is it depends on the client and the client requirements. There are integrators out there that are working in simulation, medical battle simulation, government venues where image quality is of extreme importance and larger screens are the norm. In those type of environments, it gets a little bit harder to distribute video because you are crossing some barriers of bandwidth and limitations of category cables. We're all getting very used to, in the commercial AV sector running everything through category, Cat 5e, Cat 6, Cat 6a, Cat 7. And then if we're going into the super high bandwidth content that, like you said, could be self-created, then you just got to pay attention, and in some cases even it requires running shorter HDMI cables from the source or the PC or the computer to the display to get the content to go through. So that's one of the big things. So I just think I got a couple charts in front of me that I keep handy. MPEG compression can compress data or movies or video down 100 to 1 without any visual artifacts. So if you kind of keep a chart in front of you and you're talking about the various resolutions and timings, and the highest one in HDMI 2.0 right now is 4K 60 at 444, then you'll be fine on what you install for infrastructure, whether it's category cable or whether it's HDMI cables.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about 4K. And earlier you mentioned content protection. Let's talk about HDCP 2.2 copy protection, and to what degree does that complicate things when it comes to integrators who are trying to, solve their clients' 4K content challenges, and what advice do you have for them?
Well, the couple things, if the client requirement is to distribute high value 4K UHD protected content that's protected by HDCP 2.2, then, and which would typically be movies, Hollywood movies, production movies. The common analogy now that is Netflix, House of Cards, and Breaking Bad, and some of those are being streamed in 4K and they're being protected with HDCP 2.2. There's other content that needs to be protected also. The key thing to remember, if you're going to distribute 2.2 content, everything in the system has to have a transmitter and receiver, or sync source repeater has to be HDCP 2.2 compliant. It's not a backwards compatible copy protection scheme. So that's the main thing to keep in mind. If you're going to use HDCP 2.2 source and you're going to run it through a matrix switch, which is a repeater, that has to be HDCP 2.2. And then if your display is going to decode and play that out, then that has to be able to authenticate and be 2.2 compliant also.
Okay. Jeff, I want to thank you for answering 3 questions for our commercial integrator audience.
All right, Tom, thanks for having me today.